And joining us now for a deep dive into how the Trump administration is trying to counter the Chinese Communist Party and its malign influences, Joshua Philipp, senior investigative reporter for the Epoch Times and host of Crossroads on Epoch TV. First of all, Josh, thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate your time. So I want to get your first reaction. I want to get your first reactions on China rejecting talks to reduce its nuclear arsenal. What do you think about that?
Well, it comes as no surprise. The Chinese Communist Party would be developing its nuclear weapons, I think, regardless of whether or not they agreed to it. It's the way they've always worked. One example of this, when the Chinese Communist Party joined the bioweapons agreement to not develop bioweapons, the CCP never even admitted that it owned the bioweapons that America knew it already owned, let alone showed any signs of getting rid of them. Were the Chinese Communist Party to make an agreement saying, sure, we'll reduce nuclear weapons, they'd probably do the exact same thing they do with every single other agreement, which is sign the paper and then violate the agreement before the ink is dry, because that's what they always have done.
All right, so the main topic today I wanted to discuss with you is, as you're already aware, President Trump met with the South Korean president this week, right? And it seems like South Korea wants to normalize relations with China, and during a meeting in China agreed to boost economic cooperation. Why does it seem like the CCP is at the heart of all U.S. foreign affairs and trade deals, even when it comes to, longtime U.S. allies like South Korea?
So the broader picture of the world is that the United States and the Chinese Communist Party are effectively competing for two different worldviews. America, we don't really recognize it like this, but the Chinese Communist Party sees it like this. There are two choices for governments around the world. You can have the American model, the Pax Americana, or you can have the China model, the Pax Sinica. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to create an alternate world order where it doesn't matter with human rights abuses you have, where the company's trapped into debt traps, where they're trying to justify their own totalitarian form of government as the kind of way to do things globally. I've noted actually before, because I was in South Korea doing reporting on the ground, including investigative reporting into the CCP's infiltration of the country. They have a lot of influence in South Korea, a lot of influence. And I was noting everybody's paying attention to Taiwan. Will the Chinese Communist Party invade Taiwan? The Chinese Communist Party wants to take South Korea just as much as they want Taiwan. In fact, they even have a military program for it called the Northeast Project, where they're trying to reframe South Korea as being historically a part of China. The whole thing around kimchi being Chinese, that was part of the Northeast Project, but a lot deeper than that. They're trying to say that basically it's the same country. They want to use the bringing together of the two Koreas. The unification project is their inroad for that. It's interesting now that Trump is looking to kind of rebuild ties to South Korea after some of their political turmoil there. We'll see how it goes. But it's dicey. The CCP very much wants South Korea.
So you said that the CCP has a lot of influence in South Korea, and it seems like it dates before the new president, President Lee. How did China, or the CCP rather, get such influence within the country? What is its playbook?
Well, it's the same playbook they have everywhere else. The first thing is the Chinese Communist Party believes that the weakness of capitalist systems is financial interest. They believe they can leverage material interest as the inroad into other countries. Once they gain control over the businesses, through trade, through otherwise, they then have the businesses lobby the government on behalf of them. We're talking about South Korea. They do the same thing in the United States. There are American corporations that lobby our own government on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party because the CCP uses them as the inroads for politics. Same thing with culture. We can look at how the CCP has taken over Hollywood to a very large extent. It's the same thing in South Korea. Maybe even more so because the Chinese Communist Party regards South Korean, the whole Korean wave, as more of an ideological and cultural threat than they do Hollywood, because it resonates more. It has some old Confucian values. It resonates more with the values of the societies, going back before the CCP. And so the Chinese Communist Party wants to control that. They're worried that if Korean culture becomes too broad, it'll have too much impact. And if they present values that are opposed to the CCP, then the impact, especially within the Asian countries, would be detrimental to the CCP. So they very much want to control South Korea on these same grounds.
Why do these countries allow this influence to exist on their soil? Is there an incentive that the CCP is providing certain entities?
Well, it's financial interest. It's financial interest and it's security interest. It's really the same thing with Taiwan. Taiwan has taken a very strong stance against the Chinese Communist Party, especially the party currently in power right now. But even despite that, they have massive business ties with the Chinese Communist Party. And there's, the KMT in Taiwan, more the right-wing party. They're very much in favor of open business with China. Same thing in South Korea. The Conservative Party, the former political party, the one that just kind of got pushed out, they're more in favor of the United States. They're more against the Chinese Communist Party, more against North Korea in particular. The left-wing party, the one currently in power, they're more open to China, but they're especially more open. They want to have peace across the strait. They want to reunite with North Korea and resolve the old differences. Their big thing right now is they want to push Trump to have another meeting with Kim Jong-un. Trump's open to it, so we'll see how that goes. But for their side, again, it's the same kind of political dynamic you have in a lot of other countries. You could argue that America has set the example of this just as much. We regard the Chinese Communist Party as a military threat. We regard them as an ideological threat. We have massive trade with them, regardless of all of that. And it doesn't seem that's changing, despite everything.
What is the Trump administration doing to counter the CCP in this area?
Well, basically what's happening, the Chinese Communist Party represents I'd say three different areas of force. One is military force. And when you talk about military force, they're taking it seriously. The Trump administration, they're talking right now to Japan, they're talking right now to Australia, even asking these countries, would you be ready to go to war with China? They're taking this very seriously. On the military front, it's also understood the Chinese Communist Party has huge influence, huge, hands being played across different conflicts. With Venezuela, for example, there's a conflict maybe brewing there right now. With, for example, Iran, despite all the conflicts they have with, of course, Israel, a very strong U.S. ally. The Chinese Communist Party is regarded as the main supporting factor behind the war with Russia and Ukraine. But aside from the military stance, there's also the political side and the business side. While the United States is very strong pushing back against the military side, we're very open on the political side and the business side. And unfortunately, a lot of our allies, including in Asia, they've followed the U.S. model with that. Even if they have strong posturing militarily, they do not have strong posturing on the business side or when it comes to political warfare.
So on that note, can you also comment on the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping? How are you reading that?
So India is in an interesting position. They've always been kind of a bit of like the Switzerland of Asia. And by that, I mean they like to play both sides. During the Cold War, they were close to the United States, but they were also very close allies with the Soviet Union. They were never really as close with the Chinese Communist Party, but their relations with Russia have remained very, very close. They're one of the BRICS powers, meaning they're part of the whole alliance between China, Russia, Brazil, different Middle Eastern powers, South Africa. But they've always been a little on the fringes because they have territorial disputes with the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP regards India as a competitor for cheap manufacturing. H-1B visas, the whole nine yards. They're kind of on the same playing field as competitors. And so on that front, now that Trump has put 50% tariffs on Indian goods, raising it an additional 25% because they're buying oil cheap from Russia and then reselling it for huge profits on the international market. India is looking to see, well, can we break away more fully from the U.S., instead of coming to the negotiating table and maybe ending some of these trade deals it has with Russia, unless the war ends. It's actually a bad thing, in my opinion, if India does get pushed closer to the Chinese Communist Party, because they actually have been relatively opposed to the CCP. On that front, we'll see how it goes, because both countries are looking for sellers. They're looking for buyers. They're not looking to buy things themselves. India has very, very, very strict protectionist policies in place when it comes to tariffing US goods and so on. They're not looking to buy more foreign goods. China has the exact same problem. They need buyers. They need people to buy their stuff. America was the big buyer, and America is now saying we're not going to buy unless you put these big, unless you want to pay a bunch of tariffs. It's a big question on whether they could actually mend some of their ties and not have additional conflicts. But again, we will see.
Okay, Josh, I just have a couple more things. I don't want to take up too much of your time. What did you make of the recent meeting at the White House with major European leaders? Do you think the CCP is seeing this as a show of unity in the West?
I think so. So when it comes to the European Union, the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to play it like a balkanized strategy. They don't want to do business directly with the EU. Despite the ideological differences between the United States and the European Union, everything else aside, the cultural debates, they're still regarded as very close US allies. They're regarded as NATO allies, defensive allies against Russia and against the Chinese Communist Party. On some fronts, the European Union has actually been stronger against the CCP when it comes to subversion, when it comes to calling out organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners and political prisoners in China. The EU has taken some pretty good stances. But the CCP, because it knows it can't deal with the entire EU, has been going for more of a state-to-state type approach, going directly, for example, to Italy, going directly to Hungary, going directly to local leaders rather than the entire European bloc. And on that front, of course, I think the real dividing factor is Russia. The Chinese Communist Party is the main supporter behind the war with Russia. And of course, Ukraine. Europe, that's their backyard. They're taking it even more seriously, I think, than even the United States. And so, we'll see where it goes. I do think Europe has taken a stronger stance against the Chinese Communist Party, especially since COVID-19. But again, we'll see where that goes, given the fact the CCP is trying to do more direct approaches diplomatically.
Well, okay, Josh, it's great to hear your insight. And you can find him on the Crossroads show on Epoch TV. Josh, thank you very much.
Real pleasure. Thank you.